The air over Carthage was heavy, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Streets that once rang with the cries of merchants and the clash of soldiers' boots now echoed with whispers. In this tense silence, one man's name carried across both empires: Marcus Atilius Regulus. A Roman general once celebrated as a hero of the Republic, he now stood as a prisoner far from the city that had honored him. Rome would remember him as a figure of strength, a commander who faced his end with composure. To his enemies, he was the symbol of a power that could be humbled, a reminder that even the greatest could fall. And yet, between Rome's polished records and Carthage's silence lies a story layered in uncertainty, one that historians have debated for centuries. Was Regulus truly subjected to a cruel and unusual death, as Roman writers claimed? Or was his fate reshaped by propaganda, turned into a tale of suffering so that his memory could serve as both a warning and an inspiration? Some said he endured pain with unshakable dignity. Others believed the story was embellished, his death exaggerated to strengthen Rome's cause. Whatever the truth, Regulus's end became one of the most haunting legends of the Punic Wars. His fate was retold not as the fall of one man, but as a lesson for nations, a warning to Rome's enemies, a rallying cry for its soldiers, and a scar etched into the memory of an empire. This is not just the story of a Roman general's final chapter. It is the story of how politics, ambition, and fear can transform a man's last moments into a myth that outlives him by millennia. Long before his name was whispered in Carthage, Marcus Atilius Regulus had walked the bustling streets of Rome as a soldier of the Republic. Born into a family of discipline and tradition, he carried on a legacy of service that defined many Roman households. From his earliest days in the legions, Regulus earned a reputation for strict loyalty to Rome and for a courage that bordered on defiance. He was not the kind of commander who merely ordered from a distance. He stood among his men, sharing their hunger, their exhaustion, and their victories. In the Punic Wars, that long struggle between Rome and Carthage for dominance of the Mediterranean, Regulus rose quickly. To the Senate, he was a man of unshakable resolve. To the common people, he became a symbol of Roman honor. He commanded armies across the sea, taking the fight directly to Carthaginian soil. For a time, his campaign seemed unstoppable, and the Republic celebrated him as one of its brightest stars. But history rarely grants triumph without demanding a price. His victories in Africa were followed by setbacks, and soon Regulus found himself outnumbered and isolated. Captured in battle, he was no longer the general leading Rome's legions, but a prisoner in the hands of Rome's greatest enemy. Here, his story turns from that of battlefield triumphs to something deeper, a test of character, loyalty, and endurance. Ancient sources claim that Carthage sought to use him as a bargaining tool, sending him back to Rome under oath, hoping his presence would sway the Senate toward peace. But when he stood once more before his people, Regulus did not beg for compromise. Instead, he urged the Senate to continue the war, to resist Carthage at all costs. This choice sealed his fate. By refusing to break his oath and urging Rome toward defiance, Regulus returned willingly to captivity. For the Romans, this act elevated him to near legend, a man who placed duty above life itself. For the Carthaginians, it set the stage for what would become one of the most contested and debated endings in the annals of history. When Marcus Atilius Regulus returned to Carthage, he was no longer the celebrated general of Rome, but a captive bound by honor to accept his fate. His decision to urge the Senate against peace had cost him dearly, and now every passing day seemed to press more heavily upon his body and mind. The city around him was vibrant, markets buzzing, temples standing tall, but for Regulus it was a world seen through the bars of captivity. The rhythms of Carthaginian life became a cruel reminder of the freedom he had lost. The clamor of merchants, the chants of priests, even the laughter of children, all of it filtered into the silence of his confinement, filling him not with comfort but with a deep, unshakable ache. Time has a way of wearing down even the strongest spirits. For Regulus, the proud general who once commanded legions, the slow erosion came in subtler forms. Hunger gnawed at his body, weariness bent his posture, and the absence of battle, the absence of purpose, weighed upon his soul. But perhaps the most haunting torment was not physical. It was the waiting, endless days stretching into nights, each one echoing with unanswered questions. Would Rome remember him? Would his sacrifice mean anything? Or would his name fade like so many others swallowed by the vast tide of history? Ancient writers suggest that Regulus began to experience a kind of unraveling, not madness in the wild sense, but a deep inward turning, a slow descent into the chambers of memory and doubt. He would replay the battles in his mind, reliving triumphs and failures. He would hear the imagined voices of his soldiers calling his name, waiting for commands that would never come again. The senses, too, became instruments of torment. The smell of incense from distant temples, the taste of stale bread, the scratching of rats in the dark. Each small detail became magnified in his solitude. A man once defined by the roar of armies now lived in a world of whispers and shadows. And yet through all of this, Regulus clung to one thing: his oath. He had promised Carthage he would return, and he had. He had promised Rome he would never betray its cause, and he had not. Every day of suffering became, in a way, a continuation of that choice, a living testimony to duty carried beyond reason. It is here, in this quiet decline, that the story of Regulus takes on its most haunting dimension. He was not simply a prisoner. He was a man caught between two worlds, claimed by Rome in spirit, held by Carthage in body. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, his body weakened, but his resolve stood as unyielding as ever. The story of Marcus Atilius Regulus does not end with silence. Instead, it fractures into shadows, pieces of rumor, fragments of testimony, and the whispers of history. Somewhere in that haze lies the truth of his final fate. Roman writers, eager to glorify their republic, painted Regulus as a martyr. According to them, he stood unbroken until the end, his loyalty to Rome burning brighter than any suffering he endured. Carthaginian sources, though far fewer, presented a quieter picture: a foreign general, trapped by his own stubbornness, fading into obscurity. Between these accounts lies a riddle, one that historians have debated for centuries. The most famous version is also the most dramatic. It tells of a death so cruel it could not help but become legend. Yet even in antiquity, doubts lingered. Was the tale embellished to inflame Roman hearts? Was it a carefully crafted story designed to make Regulus a symbol rather than a man? Consider this. Records suggest that after returning to Carthage, Regulus was no longer of great use to either side. Rome saw him as a noble failure. Carthage saw him as a captured enemy with little bargaining power. In such a situation, his fate may have been quiet, even ordinary. Imprisonment, illness, perhaps a natural decline. Yet ordinary endings rarely inspire nations. This is where the mystery deepens. Roman poets and historians began to circulate accounts of a hidden torment, of Carthaginian cruelty taken to its furthest extent. The more extravagant the tale, the more powerful the message. Rome's enemies were brutal, and Rome's soldiers needed to be ready for any fate. But what if this was less history and more propaganda? Imagine for a moment the senators in Rome who heard Regulus's words urging them to continue the war. His defiance gave them courage. His sacrifice gave them a hero. Would they truly allow his memory to fade with a whisper of disease or confinement? Or would they craft a tale so vivid, so terrifying, that every Roman citizen would remember it for generations? This is the heart of the hidden revelation. Regulus may have been transformed, not by what truly happened to him, but by what people needed his story to be. His body became a canvas for Rome's narrative. Whether it was broken by captivity, consumed by suffering, or simply carried away by time. In the end, there are no surviving Carthaginian documents to tell their side. The silence of the victors filled the void, and so what remains is a ghost of truth, half fact, half fable, lingering between history and myth. For us today, that uncertainty is more chilling than any single account. Because what cannot be denied is this: Regulus's death, however it came, became one of the most haunting stories of the Punic Wars. His fate was not just about one man. It became a symbol, a weapon, and a reminder of the thin line between honor and destruction. Marcus Atilius Regulus may have perished far from the streets of Rome, but his story did not. In fact, it lived on longer and louder than the man himself, shaping the way Romans thought about war, loyalty, and sacrifice for generations. To the Roman Republic, Regulus became more than a general. He became a symbol. His name was spoken in the Senate, in marketplaces, and in households as an example of unshakable devotion to the state. For Roman commanders, his memory was a lesson in endurance. For citizens, it was a reminder of the heavy price of defending their republic. Politically, his fate was used to justify the ongoing Punic Wars. Senators pointed to his suffering, real or imagined, as proof that Carthage was an enemy beyond mercy. Every new soldier marching toward battle carried with him the shadow of Regulus, a reminder of what might await if Rome faltered. In this way, one man's captivity fueled an empire's determination. Religiously and culturally, Regulus's story took on almost sacred meaning. Roman writers compared his sacrifice to those of legendary heroes, weaving him into the tapestry of Rome's founding myths. The idea that a man could remain faithful to his country, even when abandoned and destroyed, became a moral cornerstone. Centuries later, poets, historians, and even philosophers like Cicero would still point to Regulus as the embodiment of Roman virtue. Meanwhile, Carthage's reputation suffered in the Roman imagination. Whether or not they truly mistreated him became irrelevant. The tale of his suffering was retold so often that it became accepted fact. Rome did not need evidence. It needed a story powerful enough to rally its people, and Regulus provided exactly that. Ironically, the greatest consequence of Regulus's death was not military, but psychological. His memory hardened Rome's resolve. It gave the Punic Wars a moral edge, turning battles of land and sea into a crusade of honor and vengeance. The Republic was no longer just fighting for territory. It was fighting to avenge a hero. In the centuries that followed, Regulus remained a name invoked in speeches, in schools, and in the writings of Rome's greatest thinkers. His body may have been lost to time, but his story endured, echoing through history as a reminder of the dangerous power of narrative itself. When Marcus Atilius Regulus vanished from the stage of history, the silence he left behind was louder than any battle cry. His exact fate remains uncertain, blurred by rumor, reshaped by poets, and carried across centuries by storytellers who needed heroes and villains more than they needed facts. Perhaps he died in captivity, weakened by years far from home. Perhaps he was treated harshly, his name becoming a weapon in Rome's propaganda. Or perhaps his death was far less dramatic than the legends suggest, yet the truth almost doesn't matter anymore. What mattered was the story, and Rome made certain that story lived forever. Regulus became a figure trapped between reality and myth. To some, he was a martyr for the Republic, a man who gave everything for his people. To others, he was a tragic pawn, abandoned by his own leaders and remembered only when it suited their purposes. Either way, his legacy was shaped less by what truly happened and more by what Rome wanted its citizens to believe. And this is where the darkness lies. Not just in his possible suffering, but in the way history itself can be bent, sharpened, and wielded like a weapon. Rome remembered Regulus not for the man he was, but for the story it needed him to be, a warning, an inspiration, a symbol of endurance that erased the softer truths of humanity. Even now, the shadows of his Marcus Atilius Regulus's story has lingered for centuries, not only as a tale of defeat, but as a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and the heavy price of power in Rome's struggle with Carthage. His name became legend, though the truth of his final moments remains blurred by propaganda and myth. Was he truly broken by his enemies, or did Rome reshape his death into a weapon of inspiration? What do you think? Was Regulus's end a tragic reality, or a crafted story designed to stir the Roman people? Should we trust the accounts of ancient historians or question the darker motives behind their words? Tell me in the comments, and let me know if you'd like to uncover more hidden stories where history and myth collide, and where the truth is often stranger and more unsettling than legend.